Hello everyone! Today I'm going to talk to you about MySQL 8 and its difference from MariaDB 10.5, the comparison between two wonderful databases. I have relatively little time for this presentation, so it will be mostly high-level comparison. Now, the first thing, which I think many of you are aware about, is what MariaDB is not MySQL. And while MariaDB started from the same roots as MySQL, and the first versions of MariaDB were very similar, right now they have diverged substantially, and I would rather see them as two great but also quite different databases. You can still run some applications on both MySQL and MariaDB, but especially if you are using the new features introduced in those databases, then portability between them may be harder. Now, me being the CEO of Percona, which produces a product which can be seen as a competitor to both those products, it would be hard to claim absolute fairness, so I will pledge fairness of being offensive enough to both of those technologies, and you folks probably will disagree with plenty of stuff I will say here, wherever you are MariaDB users or MySQL users. So let's dive right in, as we don't have a lot of time to spend. First, let's look at the development model. If you look at the MySQL, it is developed by MySQL team at Oracle Corporations. Contributions are accepted. Even from us at Percona, we have contributed a fair amount of small patches, though we're not the biggest third-party contributor. All right, but while contributors are accepted, the MySQL practice what I would call the dropship open source model. That means the development is not done in public, but when Oracle chose to do release, the source code appears on GitHub as well. With MariaDB, the MariaDB server is released by MariaDB Foundation, but I would say what development and roadmap are mostly driven by MariaDB Corporation at this point. Contributions with MariaDB are not only accepted, but they are also encouraged, and development is done much more in the public, especially when it comes to the server side. What is interesting though in the MariaDB case, there are those two entities, MariaDB Corporation and MariaDB Foundation, and I, as an outsider, find this relationship to be super unclear and complicated. For example, MariaDB Foundation is responsible for MariaDB server, but many other connectors, which you would argue are also necessary parts of the complete solutions, are owned by MariaDB Corporation and released under a variety of licenses. Now, even what you would consider Docker server parts, such as MariaDB Docker builds, are provided by MariaDB Corporation. Now, there are also other bits and pieces which I find interesting. For example, MariaDB knowledge base, which a lot of community contributes to, is hosted and controlled by MariaDB Corporation, even though you would potentially see that as a community project. Now, I also found this interesting experience just a few days ago. If you download something from MariaDB.org, you would, after download completes, redirect it to a MariaDB Corporation page, which is, as you can see here, is a form which shows what you are providing the data to MariaDB Corporation, and may choose to share that with MariaDB Foundation as well, while that is not what I would expect as a user, right? If I download something from MariaDB Foundation, I would expect that is where my data would go, and not to MariaDB Corporation, which may use that for a different purposes. The next step or next question is, what is really open source and what is not in those in MariaDB and MySQL ecosystems? MySQL follows a very clear and simple open core model. So if you think about a MySQL platform, there is a community version of a whole platform, like for example, MySQL MariaDB cluster is the high availability solution, which is completely open source, includes open source router, and so on and so forth. And then there is an enterprise version, which is a commercially licensed tools and plugins, which are more powerful, of course, right? For example, you would get MySQL Enterprise Monitor, right, with variety of graphical user interface tools only in Enterprise. What also I think MySQL has done very well through history is there have been no components which initially came as an open source and then were relicensed under proprietary license as a community got some traction. In MariaDB space, MariaDB server is open source and MariaDB connectors are open source, but there are also parts of solutions which are not. For example, if you are building high availability environment with MariaDB, the default and recommended choice is to use MaxScale as a router, which is not open source, it's business source license. And also the story with MaxScale is complicated because it was started as an open source project, but then later moved to the proprietary license as it got some adoption, which some people may consider as a form of bait and switch. MariaDB Enterprise Server is also an interesting kind of open source, right? Obviously, MariaDB inherits a lot of a GPL code from MySQL, so we can't really close source the servers. But what they can choose is to distribute the MariaDB Enterprise source and binaries only to customers, and that is what I mean by open source for customers. You can also see Expand Storage Engine, which is something which came through Clustering acquisition, is only available in that proprietary version of Maria Enterprise Server, at least at this point. Now let's look at also about the relationship between the open source and the subscription version. In MySQL, the MySQL Enterprise is superset of MySQL Community. So wherever you use in MySQL Community will work in MySQL Enterprise and some more. There is also aligned release schedule. That means that the MySQL Enterprise of certain minor version and Community, they release at the same day. In MariaDB case, MariaDB Enterprise Server is extended subset of Community. It includes some additional features like Expand Storage Engine, right? But there are also some features which are available in Community version which may not be considered mature enough or not included in the Enterprise or MariaDB Enterprise platform for one reason or another, right? And also MariaDB platform has its separate lifecycle. If you think about the cloud native, right, and I mean by cloud native in this case the Kubernetes focused, here is a situation I think is very interesting for both the database technologies, and I am not using interesting as a complement in this case. If you look at the MySQL, there is an alpha version of open source MySQL Kubernetes operator which had last commit about 16 months ago, so it's kind of slightly dead. There are a lot of third-party Kubernetes operators and Helm charts, right, other packages available for MySQL from Presslabs, Percona, and a whole bunch of other third parties. With MariaDB, the Kubernetes operator was actually announced as one of the launch operators during the Operator Hub launch by Red Hat. But since that, it was pulled, And if you find that page in archive, a press release or operator hub, you will get links not found. Or I'm not sure what the exact story behind that. At the same time, there is a commercial MariaDB Enterprise operator available from MariaDB Corporation. Right, so this is kind of puzzling to me, because if MariaDB Foundation focuses on the service side and the Kubernetes is really one of the modern ways how you distribute and consume software, I would expect that, as long as the Docker builds, to be on the roadmap for MariaDB Foundation to cover. And of course, for MariaDB, there is a very large amount of third-party Helm or operator projects exist, right? But that is just so foundational piece of infrastructure. If you would use that, you would really want something which is well supported. Database as a service. In this case, we have MariaDB and MySQL community versions are available on a variety of clouds: Google, Amazon, Azure, DigitalOcean, and others. Right? And also MySQL serves as a base for Amazon Aurora, which I would call the most popular cloud fork, right? Which is something cloud vendor forked and didn't release changes. Now, both MariaDB Corporation and Oracle, they offer database as a service for their respectful enterprise versions, right? Which are not available on the other cloud, with exception of, as far as I could find, Alibaba, which also offers enterprise version of MariaDB through partnerships. Both MariaDB and Oracle's MySQL recognize that the analytics is an important part of a modern workloads, and column store engine, which first appeared in MariaDB platform, now is available in MariaDB 10.5, like as a completely open source solutions, while MySQL has MySQL Analytics service, which is available in Oracle Cloud only. As far as I have seen, it's not have been available either in community as or an open source edition so far. So where do we see the focus? If you think about MariaDB, it's initially competed with MySQL on features, getting features out there faster, right, and so on and so forth. But then MySQL was catching up with those, and I see in recent years a lot of shift happened. We focus on comparability and migration features from Oracle, Microsoft SQL servers. Really, a lot of usability for sysadmin DBAs, like for example, startup scripts or like shell highlights and so on and so forth are very good in MariaDB. And more recently, I see that as a cloud integration and general cloud integration, such as support for S3 storage engine in MariaDB 10.5. MySQL focus more on the traditional MySQL use cases, trying to make MySQL better MySQL. It also worked on improving SQL support, CTEs, windowing functions, like some of the things which appeared in the new releases, as well as trying to tackle the NoSQL market with doc store and very advanced JSON features. Right? We really also focus on usability for developers. For example, MySQL shell, which includes integration with JavaScript or Python. And with a cloud focus, MySQL focuses on the database which can run best in Oracle Cloud rather than general clouds. Also, other clouds, of course, benefit from a lot of features being added to support Oracle Cloud, but that is less priority. And we see MySQL is not focused on advanced Oracle features, right? And there is different theories I have heard about that. Some of them I saw is because the customers, well, what Oracle has, they're not asking for those advanced Oracle features because they already have Oracle for that. Or maybe that is a product strategy not to disrupt or big Oracle database, right, with MySQL. You can make your own mind here. If you think from an architecture approach, MySQL really started in the recent version painful refactoring on an old code base. We can see InnoDB data dictionary problem was tackled in MySQL 8. They introduced Vulkan optimizer. There is a really focus on, I think, on prioritizing ease of use and limit choices, saying, hey, you know what, we're not going to really have a lot of storage engines for everything. Let's not have users think about that. We'll just have one default InnoDB storage engine. We'll try to make work for from everything. But at the same time, I think some decisions MySQL took were kind of needlessly complex and sometimes disconnected from reality, right? For example, MySQL GTID's introduction in the time was, well, quite fiasco, right? For MariaDB is more focused on pushing old code base further, right? It didn't have such a massive change as MySQL took in MySQL version, but really it prioritizes a lot of choice and flexibility, support for multiple storage engine, right? And really its development team, I think, is working much closer with the customers and much closer to understanding the practical operations problems sysadmins, right, and otherwise would have. Now, in the recent years, MariaDB also acquired some InnoDB developers, and it has its own philosophy and roadmap on making InnoDB better. And now I think you have a very fun opportunity to compare the Oracle's InnoDB to MySQL's InnoDB to see which one performs well. And I think that is fantastic competition, which we will probably benefit users overall. Here is example of release frequency. If you can see what MariaDB releases much faster than MySQL. If you see in this case, MySQL has a major release every 2-3 years, right? And we don't know when and if next MySQL major release is coming. MariaDB has been working last 4 years almost like a clockwork, releasing the new stable release sometime in May or June every year, right? So very different life cycle. Though that doesn't mean that the MySQL is moving very slow. The release philosophy is also very different. MariaDB continues classic MySQL philosophy, where you have relatively frequent major releases, and then there are no major changes in minor releases. So that's kind of mostly bug fixes and small tinkering, right? And that also means that you can do both upgrades and downgrades, keeping dataset intact. The MySQL 8 is what is called evergreen release, right? It's saying, hey, you know what? We are breaking that old ideas. Now we're going to introduce features in minor releases. And what that also means, you won't be able to do downgrades. Okay, with that, let's look at some more technical specifics. What do we have in terms of client protocol? Both MariaDB and MySQL support classic MySQL protocol, but also MySQL has done some extensions. For example, it supports SRVD next record support, and I think the biggest new thing in MySQL is this thing called X protocol, which allows you to the new protocol, which you can use both SQL as well as a doc store protocol. In MariaDB, it has classic MySQL protocol as well as its own protocol extensions, for example, for progress reporting and some others. If you look at the interface support, MySQL, you can use classical SQL, you can use doc store, you can also use Memcache, talk to that through Memcache protocol. MariaDB supports SQL as well as handler socket plugin. If you look at JSON support, that is, I think, where MySQL is substantially ahead. It has a native JSON data types. It supports very efficient partial updates of large JSON fields. It has things like JSON shortcuts, which you can use conveniently inside of queries. Advanced features such as JSON tables. Where with MariaDB it has some JSON functions, but it also stores JSON as a text field, and there is, I think, a lot of work is being done in MariaDB right now to support JSON better. Replication. In MySQL, you have MySQL group replication and MySQL's GTID. Now it has added also a clone plugin for efficient provisioning, which can be used for both classical MySQL replication as well as a group replication. MariaDB does not support group replication. It uses Galera replication instead, and it uses also its own GTID, right? So replication is something which is a very different between those two databases, and in generally ways how you provide high availability, right? So that is something I would be looking very closely to. In terms of SQL standards and compatibility, I cannot find anything big which MySQL has which MariaDB does not offer, right? So I think MariaDB, well, outside of JSON, right, frankly. MariaDB, though, it adds SQL mode equals Oracle, which has a lot of Oracle-like extensions. It supports system version tables, right, sequence. It supports packages and storage procedures, right? So a lot of stuff to compatibility with standard and with other databases. Now, if you want to look into the more detailed feature comparisons, you can check out these fantastic blogs on modernsql.com, though I would point out they are both now about 2 years old. It only covers MariaDB 10.3, and MariaDB 10.4 and 10.5 have more stuff. And also actually MySQL have been adding more features in the new MySQL 8 releases, right? So be careful with that. Security. There are significant differences in security and user account management. You know, how roles are implemented, privileges, the names, what corresponds to, right? So that is also something there are a lot of difference, right, if you're considering migrating between those technologies. Optimizer is another huge item which their database are very different. Right, I would see if you are moving some complicated queries between MySQL and MariaDB and vice versa. We really check out Explain for them, because performance for complicated queries can be substantially different, right? And if you talk to both development team, MySQL and MariaDB folks, they both can point to queries which run better, faster on their platform, right? But in the end, what you probably should know as a user, hey, there may be difference here, be careful with that. Well, and in fact, that is all I have. If you're interested to hear some more about the open source databases, including MySQL and MariaDB, I want to invite you to PureCon Live Online in October 2020. With that, thank you. Let's keep in touch.